Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida Fair Tax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, July 24th, 2020. The Supreme Court and the Trump tax returns. On Thursday, July 9th, the Supreme Court issued 3 decisions that will ensure that the controversy over the president's federal income tax returns will continue to distract attention from the real problems we're facing. Now, 2 of the cases involved congressional subpoenas that sought to obtain the president's income tax returns. Now, the court didn't decide these cases, but instead sent them back down to the lower court. In doing so, Chief Justice Roberts said that the courts considering such subpoenas should perform a careful analysis that takes adequate account of the separation of powers principle at stake, including both the significant legislative interest of Congress and the unique position of the president. The lower court should determine whether the president's tax returns are really necessary because the information cannot be obtained anywhere else. They need to determine whether the subpoena is as limited in scope as it can be while still serving Congress's purpose, whether Congress has shown that the subpoena advances a valid legislative purpose, and what burdens the subpoena imposes on the president. The third case concerned a subpoena issued to President Trump's accounting firm by Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance. Now, that was part of an investigation by a state grand jury into criminal violations of New York law. Now, the president had argued that the subpoenas could not be enforced on him while he was in office. The justices rejected the president's argument that he is categorically immune from state criminal subpoenas, but they sent the case back down to the lower courts to allow the president the opportunity to challenge the subpoenas on other grounds. Now, once the lower courts have issued their decisions either upholding or denying the subpoenas, it is certain that the losing side will appeal, and this controversy will continue for years. But the court really ignored the elephant in the room. While the media is going crazy speculating on the impact of these decisions, no one is asking the obvious question: why should anyone be required to file an income tax return in the first place? A federal tax return is signed under penalty of perjury. This means that the taxpayer filing the return is subject to criminal prosecution if it contains any untrue statements. Now, some people say, well, look, if you've been honest on your income tax return, then what do you have to fear? Well, that's a legitimate question, but it's just not that simple. By signing your tax return under penalty of perjury, you are stating that the information you have provided is true and in conformity with the corrupt and incomprehensible Internal Revenue Code. Now, given the complexity and all the ambiguities in the tax code, can anyone really attest to that with confidence? Well, perhaps those whose return is just a statement of income from their employer and the calculation of the resulting income taxes can, but the huge majority of taxpayers can't. Even relatively simple 1040 returns can have multiple double-sided pages that even paid tax preparers often disagree on how to complete. Now, this problem is magnified by a factor of 10 for business returns. Now, as we know, the Internal Revenue Code is full of provisions that can be interpreted in different ways. Now, all of us want to pay as little in federal income tax as we can, so we make our interpretations in the way that is most favorable to us. Now, sometimes people make honest mistakes, and sometimes they do something inappropriate on their return without even knowing it. Now, how many of us, when we get our federal income tax return back from our preparer, actually go through it line by line to verify that all of the information is correct? Right, nobody. Now, business tax returns are far more complex. Both President Trump's personal and business tax returns can be hundreds or even thousands of pages long. And even though he has to sign them, does anyone really believe that he goes through them page by page, looking at every figure and verifies the information? Didn't think so. Yet, like all of us who sign a federal income tax return, the president is signing under penalty of perjury and is thereby declaring that each and every statement on his immense tax returns is true and correct. Now, largely because of the complexity and vagueness of the Infernal Revenue Code, it is very difficult to sue someone in order to obtain copies of their federal income tax returns. Many courts apply a two-part test to determine if a person must show their income tax return to someone who is suing them. First, the requesting party must show that the income tax returns are relevant to a legitimate purpose, and second, that the information contained in them is not readily obtainable by other means, which it almost always is. Now, in January of 2019, the California Court of Appeals ruled that under California law, federal and state tax returns are privileged, and improper disclosure can give rise to claims for tortious invasion of privacy. Now let's look at the Fifth Amendment violation and what the court should have addressed. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states the following, quote, "No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." End of quote. Now, it's the provision against self-incrimination that's in play here. If someone falsified his income, assets, and liabilities in order to get a mortgage or a credit card, then he's guilty of fraud. Now, President Trump, like all the rest of us, is required to sign his income tax return containing information, the accuracy of which he didn't personally verify but trusted others to compile. He's attesting that the information is true under penalty of perjury, but he doesn't really know for sure. Now, because false statements on an income tax return can be prosecuted, as Al Capone found out the hard way, an in-depth examination of the president's income tax returns could very well lead to referrals to federal prosecutors. A prosecutor can find any data in the income tax return that appears to be incorrect or could be inconsistent with other data the prosecutor has obtained. They can then use the conflicting data to claim that the individual or business violated the law, either the Internal Revenue Code or another federal or state law. In other words, by using information from a tax return, a prosecutor is using a person's own statements against him in order to charge him with a crime. Now, how is that not a clear violation of the Fifth Amendment? Now, how could the courts up to and including the Supreme Court ignore this basic fact? In conclusion, we've seen many people invoke their rights under the Fifth Amendment to not answer questions on the grounds that it may incriminate them. Now, this is a right that most Americans agree is an essential part of our rights as Americans. However, why do so few people object to filing federal income tax returns that are used to incriminate us? People incriminated by their own tax returns are often sent to prison, and still no one objects. Now, the ruling class and their minions are not worried. They know that the law is applied differently to them. Now, they hang on to the federal income payroll tax system because of the money it makes for them and the control it gives them over the rest of us. Now, sometimes we forget just how powerful we the people are. We number in the tens of millions, they're only tens of thousands. Yes, they spin the myth that they are all powerful, just like the leaders of all the failed civilizations in the past said just before they were removed. Now, these parasites can only live if we allow them to feed on us. Demand that the fair tax become the law of the land and replace the corrupt income payroll tax system. Now, if you're ready to take a very significant step towards taking control of your government back from a small group of corrupt people and making it possible for all to prosper, go to fairtax.org. Watch the whiteboards under how it works, read the FAQ, and then if you agree, please join us. Then contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the fair tax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.